Now that we've got our NPV program working, we can actually make it a little bit better. And the reason is that the message boxes, while nice, don't really leverage the full capabilities of Excel. Right? We're showing message boxes with numbers, and then presumably the user could write them down or type them into the Excel spreadsheet, although they can't really type in the Excel spreadsheet when you have message boxes popping up. So you're going to write it down and then type it into the Excel spreadsheet once the message boxes are gone, right? That's silly. We can actually directly record those values in the Excel spreadsheet, either organized vertically or horizontally. That way the user has a record of those calculations that were done. So that's what we're going to see in this video, is how we can add that extra bit of capability to output values from our programs into our spreadsheet. So we're going to do this. Let's go back into our code. Right? We already have a working program, so let's copy that, and then we're going to add some additional functionality. So I'm going to copy this program, move it down to the bottom here, and rename this NPV Sub v2. Right? So version 2 is going to build in this extra capability of outputting the values to the user. However, the first thing we need to know if we're going to output values to the user is where in the spreadsheet to put them. Right? Excel doesn't know whether it should put the values here or down here. So we have to give it a starting cell. So we're going to need a little bit more information from the user. For this case, let's go ahead and target this cell. So it's going to be cell E4. So there are two pieces of information we need there. We're going to need the output row, and that's going to be as an integer, right? Because each row is a number. And then we're going to need the output column, and we're going to set this up as a string because it's a letter. All right, that's going to be the difference between these two. We need one as a number and one as a letter. We have to initiate those values, and then we have to ask the user for them. So let's copy one of our input boxes. We're going to rebuild this for output row. And we're going to say, please enter row for present value PV output. We don't need our I in there. And now we probably do need a suggested row. Let's just suggest row 4, since that's where we know we want to go. Now for output row, let's just copy this so we can build the same thing for output column. Please enter output column, let's be specific, output column letter and output row number. Just be a little bit more specific so our user knows what we want. And then finally for our default value, let's go ahead and put E. So now we should get some values from the user. That way we know where to start this at. Now we need the piece of code that's actually going to print these values into the cells. So let's go ahead and take for one more time our built-in loop, right? But now we got to change our loop just a little bit. So each time we cycle through these cash flows, 1 through 5, we're going to put one of those values into a cell. So cells is going to be the command that we use. Cells, and we're going to do output row, comma, output column. And we're going to set the value of that cell. So whenever you do a dot after referring to some object, like a cell, dot value means you want to set that value. And what do we want to set it to? Well, the present value we calculated. So store PVI. So let's run the code now and see what we get back out. So we come down, and I'm going to run PV Sub v2. We get the same input boxes we had before. We click through those. We get our same message boxes where we're getting our answers back out. Notice that last one, the value is 62.09. Now we need to enter where this is going to go. So row 4, column E, and now we get the value 62.09. That was the last value of the cash flow. Notice we didn't get all 5 cash flows yet. And we actually did for a very short moment in time. Because what happened to the code is, as it looped, it put the first cash flow in E4, and then the second cash flow in E4. And it kept putting the values in E4, so it was overwriting our previous values. So we need a way that it'll go from E4 to E5 to E6 to E7 to E8. So that's the last piece we need to add in here. So let's come back in, and now we recognize that that output row needs to change. So each time it needs to increment down by I. So we can do output row plus I. But now we have to think, okay, if we're going to start in 4, the first time through the loop, we're going to do 4 plus 1. So we need to back it up by just 1 with a -1 to let it know that we're going to start at 4. That'll be the first one, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8. So let's rerun our code, check how that works. A lot of clicking through message boxes here. This is where you don't want to rely on message boxes too much, but it's great to understand how your code is progressing. And now we see all 5 cash flows output. So now we have a record of that. We didn't need our message boxes. We'll go turn those off since we don't need to write those down by hand anymore. All right, so now that we've done that, let's see how we could actually just flip this and make a slight change to make it go horizontally instead. So we're back in VBA. Let's go ahead and copy this function and make a third function. So I'm going to take this version. We're going to move to the bottom here, create some space, and now we're creating the sub v3. Most of the code, again, is the same. Like I said, let's turn off those message boxes that we're repeating. So we're just going to comment that out so we don't see all those present value of cash flow messages. And now we're going to think about how we can flip this from being vertical to being horizontal. So the key to making it horizontal is instead of incrementing across the rows, we got to increment across the columns. So we can think about adding plus I minus 1 the same way we did before. So let's go see how that works after we make an adjustment to our input cell, right? Our input cell is going to change. So we don't want to start in E4. Let's start this time in B17. So let's change our default values to row 17 and column B. All right, let's flip back and see how this third function, sub, now works. So we enter our discount rate, we click through all of our cash flows, get our NPV, we get row 17, column B, and we get an error, all right? It gave us a type mismatch error. So let's go ahead and hit debug so it takes us to where the problem is, and it's in this line here. And now a type mismatch basically cues you in that there's some issue in what you're trying to do to a variable type. That's what the type is referring to. And the problem is that an output column, if you recall, is a string, right? B, C, D, they're letters, right? And we're trying to add numbers to them. So we can't really add numbers to letters. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's why we're getting our error. So I'm going to reset the project. And what we're going to need to do is figure out what column this is based on a number. So we're going to add a little bit more code here. So we're going to say dim column number as an integer. And now we have to figure out what the column number is. You and I know that column B is the second column, but it's going to be harder to figure out that as a programmatic way, like, you know, what's E, what's F, what's G. You can figure each one out, but you need a way for the computer to know that. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to set column number equal to range. And now we're setting the range of a certain cell. So range is a way to access a cell. So in this case, we want to access the cell that is output column and 1. So what that's doing is it's concatenating B with the number 1. So we're saying range B1. So we're just trying to find a cell that is in column B. We're just going to pick the first cell. And what we want to know about that is the column. So when we use this .column property of the range of the cell B1, that tells us that that is column 2. So this is just a convenient way to convert from a letter-based column to a number-based column. And once we've made that conversion, we can take column number, substitute that for output column, and now go back and rerun our code. So let's try this one more time. We click through a bunch of our message boxes. Not all of them, though. We set our output at B17, and now we get all 5 cash flows output. We don't have a type mismatch because that column number is actually an integer type, and we can add I to it each time through our loop. So that's given us different output. Obviously, we can move this around, right? If we want to rerun this, let's just rerun the basic cash flows, get our NPV, and let's now put it, let's put it over in G10. So let's put D10 with a G. Now we started it in G10, and we pasted our 5 values across. So really, you have a little bit more dynamic control. You can put your answers wherever it's convenient in your spreadsheet, using a combination of kind of output statements and loops to make all of our code a little bit